I'm Andrew Johnson. This is Mark Scroggins. We're joined off camera by Mira, who is our lovely, producer of this show, which we could not do without her. So
there you go.
Mira.
So the Queen died.
She did.
You know,
God save the Queen.
right. So what exactly defines one as an Anglophile?
I guess it would be somebody who is content on understanding the affairs of the monarchy, correct?
Is that what it's about? I mean, because I was a history major in college. And so from a historical standpoint, I'm intrigued by how a country that small basically rules the world at one point. You could say the same thing for, Portugal, Spain, France,
sure,
at different times. So that, from a historical standpoint, I find very intriguing. A constitutional monarchy, just from, God, that's kind of weird standpoint, is interesting. But I don't understand so many Americans really being that interested in a monarchy. Do you?
I think it's just kind of a remnant of nostalgia. It's kind of like almost like we're societally tied to this idea of the monarch is somebody who's above the common man.
Pomp and circumstance,
exactly,
and it was a better time.
But I mean, it's just somebody who they don't have a last name. They're like they're a class that exists only of their own above everybody else, and so it's like a celebrity status.
Right.
And this is the longest version of celebrity that has existed from the ancient world power to the modern world power. So I can see that people are infatuated with the idea of being a royal because of the quote unquote like wealth and I guess influence that accompanies that position, even though it doesn't really have as much influence. I think that's one of the most interesting things about this new president, King Charles, is that I think he's actually going to he will have less overall power than the Queen did because his influence will be reduced as each monarch dies.
I could definitely see that. I'm not familiar with, my understanding is that, and I could be totally wrong, and if I am, I would love to hear about it, but I don't think the monarch or the entire monarchy is really supposed to be playing a role in any of the politics of Great Britain, as I understand it.
That's not the publicly stated, I guess, motto, but the hush-hush way that is approached by the monarchy is that the Queen can certainly, or now the King, does have impact on public policy. They can call the Prime Minister and say, hey, I really don't like this, and I'd like you to reconsider your position on something, and that is...
But what does the Prime Minister have to do with that?
There's no real power that he has to concede to the monarch. But
exactly.
I think what happens is, because of that societal implication of the monarch, they wield more unofficial power than what is deemed in a actual text of law.
So I've always thought that the monarchy, one of the reasons that there was such intrigue with the monarchy was because at one time, that was the richest class of people. And so it was the wealth and all of that people were so intrigued by. But now, frankly, it's the titans of industry that hold, all the money, all the cards, or the majority of the cards in that kind of thing. I mean, Sergey Brin is worth what, 94 million, going through a divorce right now. Sergey, call me if you need some help. I'll walk you through that. But I think that was one of the things that was intriguing because it was so untouchable. It was something that could never be achieved. And now, when you look at the Queen died and was worth about $500 million. In the realm of the ultra rich, that makes her an also ran.
Yeah.
I can't imagine. I can't believe I'm saying that. I would love to have that kind of money, but
I think that the thing that's obfuscated from us is that the Queen might have personal assets of $500 million,
right?
But her real assets that she is entitled to as a monarch are not published, nor will ever know that number. It is probably at this point in the hundreds of billions of dollars with her real estate holdings, with whatever she has that's not public knowledge. That is such an old family that they probably have assets that are quite wealthy. Think about like $70+ billion of real estate they control in the UK right now.
So I think so as I understand it, they basically serve based on the benevolence of the ruling class, right? So if at any point, because what typically happens with a monarchy or a dictatorship that, owns everything, so to speak, it's like, when the idiots down in Venezuela nationalized everything, and all of a sudden, everything that what used to be Gulf and Conoco and ExxonMobil and all of these had done in their oil fields, all is now owned by the state.
Venezuela Inc.
And in a situation where it's a monarchy, everything is owned by the monarchy. So if you do away with the monarchy, all of those assets are basically absorbed back into ownership by the state, correct? So I guess my question is, and I don't know the answer to this, I just find it interesting. If the people of Britain at some point decided that, what do we really have a monarchy for anymore? And, we're going to do away with the constitutional monarchy aspect of our Constitution, what then happens to all the assets of the royals?
Well, I think that goes deeper into the study of the philosophies behind the bond between the British people and the monarchy.
Right.
I just don't see a situation in which the monarchy could ever be so unpopular they'd be dissolved. And so, yeah, I suppose that's the case.
Well, there's been talk about that in the past.
There has, but
So-
I just don't see like where that. I just don't see a situation in which that would happen. I guess is my opinion.
Yeah.
So it's interesting nonetheless, but I just would feel it'd be a lot easier for you to figure out how to socialize and tax the shit out of Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates what it would be to actually do that to the monarchy, because if her personal net worth is $500 million, but her actual estate, it's property of the monarchy is 30. This is I think it's like 36.6 billion is what the estimate is. Will that put enough of a dent in what is needed? I mean, that's I guess one of the big things that you and I talked about before this, which will be a quick segue. We can talk about more in a different segment. Is the implication of the cost of what it might be to solve the energy crisis that's facing Europe from Russia restricting national gas. It's been estimated that there'll be potentially $100 billion plus euro liability that could maybe solve the gas shutoff that's happening to Germany and to other European nations, Germany being hit the hardest. So we'll talk about that more in another segment, but I think it'd be kind of a fun segue, speaking of socialism, to talk about how some of these celebrity divorces have filtered out over the years. So
Yeah, so let's talk about a couple of those. So you've got, Bill and Melinda Gates. Bill's worth more than 112 billion. You have Adele, who just got divorced. Jeff Bezos and Mackenzie Scott, Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. Everyone loves that. And by the way, Amber, did you ever? What was it? Was it difference between pledge and donate $7 million? Neither of which you have done.
yes, she pledged as much as I did on the side of my UNICEF box when I was in 6th grade, and I still don't remember if I paid my $1 pledge to UNICEF or not. So it goes better than Amber Heard and her $7 million pledge. So
Yeah.
She did get $500,000 or $100,000 from the Elon guy when they were dating.
Oh,
She got 100,000 from him.
that's a
That
pretty
went to
Was paid to.
That was paid on her behalf.
it's a pretty high escort fee, honestly.
Well, there have been articles recently talking about that.
I mean,
So
she's got some weird things that she does in the shadows.
there might be a hooch component to this. I'm not sure. So, but yeah, so I get questions about. Here's one of the things where it's interesting. I find it amusing as a divorce lawyer seeing some of this, because what always happens is, I represent a number of very wealthy people. Some have been, sometimes both people are making a shit ton of money. More often than not, it's one party is making a lot of money and the other is not. And what here is generally the storyline as as it comes to me. I'm the one who's worked all the time. I can't believe I'm having to give her shit.
And
Well,
her response is, or his response is that, hey, if it weren't for me, you wouldn't have this family that's been supported, and we support every other component of your life.
right.
So
And so the significant thing is in Texas, okay, it all circles around what is community property, okay? And so generally, folks, that means if you earned it during the marriage, it's going to be community. Now, that's not 100% correct, because you can have separate property things, and you can have what is called commercial goodwill, which If it is personal goodwill, that's separate property. Okay, so that's basically around what your name is and what you bring to something specific. But when Bill Gates leaves Microsoft, for example, Microsoft isn't going to stop. It's still got a value as a company. The argument was made, frankly, at the time that he left and Steve Ballmer came in to run it, that probably actually increased the value of Microsoft at the time. Although I don't think I've ever seen such a big rah-rah guy as Steve Ballmer.
Oh, he was incredible.
So
Now, if you're facing is that true to the idea that if you're in some sort of partnership or you are executive or a managing partner of a company that will clearly run without you,
yeah.
does that protect the interests of people that are not part of your world, you're part of your divorce?
So that's a great question, and that is a much more difficult answer. Okay, so what you typically have in these large partnerships, okay, and I'm going to talk really from the standpoint of legal partnerships that are law firms, I should say, okay, that I am more familiar with. And
Sure.
what you typically have is when someone is admitted into the partnership, usually there's a buy-in, okay, that may or may not be financed. But typically with signing of the partnership interest, there are all kinds of levels of different partnership. And a lot of the time, there is an agreement by the parties on the value of the partnership interest in case of death or divorce, okay? And what that usually entails is that your spouse has signed off on those documents as well, okay? That is a way that you control that, okay? When there isn't anything signed like that, it's a different question. And that brings up the issue of prenuptial agreements and postnuptial agreements and
Also buy-sell agreements.
sure.
Because that's a very easy way that we've seen changes be implemented in a partnership to ensure that does not become an issue. And I think you probably have an equal probability in a lot of partnerships of either divorce and or death.
Yeah, but here's one of the different things with a law firm.
It could be a deadly divorce.
There definitely been some of those. But here's the thing. So if I were to get, if my interest in my firm was community, and my wife and I got divorced, okay, and even if the court wanted to award her my law firm, they could not, okay, because in Texas you cannot have a non-attorney owner of a law firm, and that is in any percentage, okay? Now that's different in some states. You are starting to see kind of like what has happened. The easiest way is to think of Doc in the Box, okay? A lot of the Doc in the Boxes are owned by corporations. Well, as I understand it, it used to be at one point, it was kind of the same thing there. You had to be a doctor to own a medical practice. It's not like that anymore, okay? Well, in Texas, it is still that way as far as law firms go. What you see in some other states is where you might have an estate planning lawyer, an estate planner, and an accountant that are in a partnership together.
Sure.
And they fee split, okay? So that's the whole basis of that, which is boring as hell, and I'm not going to go down that road a whole lot. But that's one of the things I get asked those questions about. Why do I have to pay her anything? Or I can't believe that SOB only wants to pay me X, okay? The problem is in Texas, it is all based around this community property. You have certain things like buy-sell agreements, other things that are a way to limit things, premarital agreements, postmarital agreements. But the other things that you hear about is like, I think you and I have talked about Shawn Kemp before. So for those of you, it's been a long time, but Shawn Kemp was an incredible basketball player, but he also had, I think it was 7 kids by 7 different baby mamas. And the amount of child support that he was ordered to pay, I think most of these came out of Seattle, was a shit ton. And so he was broke almost immediately upon getting out of the NBA. And so like I think there was
like $30K a month or something like that, right?
Something like that. I think there's, and I think I was reading something about, what's his name? Maverick. Tom Cruise. Yeah, when Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes got divorced, he was paying $400,000 a year in child support. Well, in Texas, that would never happen. Okay, unless you contractually obligated yourself to do that, but a court couldn't do that unless you found that the child basically had significant special needs that would require that kind of care. It has absolutely nothing to do about a lifestyle that you are used to or anything like that. That's just kind of a so sad, too bad kind of deal. That's not, the days of equestrian riding and jet setting for your 10th birthday are over.
Sure.
Unless mommy or daddy wants to pay for that.
Correct.
So
And I think one thing I'll bring up too, just going back a little bit to our question about, how do you prepare a partnership, a business partnership from the potential of divorce or death is there are actually special policies you can purchase. A lot of people are familiar with something called Keyman, but there's also something called a buy-sell insurance policy you can buy. And this can be done either by term or by permanent insurance, term being the cheaper option, permanent being an option that I can explain is actually more beneficial because it can be translated into an asset down the road.
right.
But in the very basis, getting term would be very helpful because what that does for you is it allows you as a maybe a partnership that might be investing a lot of capital back in the business. You might not have a lot of liquidity if your partner dies.
Right.
And if you got to pay $2 million to buy the spouse out or keep on the spouse that you might not be very close to as your business partner,
Right.
you'd much rather have that $2 million insurance policy just to pay the partner out and be done.
Right.
So let's take a break from here and we'll get started on some other topics here in a few.
Sounds good.